When Tim Beck took over Coastal Carolina, I think a lot of people had doubts about what he could do with this program. I think he surprised some people, maybe not a ton, but he did surprise some people. Getting them back to a bowl game at 6-7 was probably also, it was probably surprising, but also slightly disappointing. But with the talent they have coming back and the talent they bring in from the transfer portal, you feel like they have a good chance of having more success in 2025. We take a look at some of those players, the top players for this team this year, and take a look at the schedule at the end of the video to see what we should expect. The defense definitely has a lot of work to do, but getting Shane Bruce back was a nice return for them. Honorable mention all Sun Belt last year, 75 tackles, 5 tackles for loss. This is a defense that has a lot of work to do. Did not thrive in many statistical categories, but they do return a good core of talent that could potentially make things better. The offense is a little bit of a different story, and actually I really like what this passing attack could be in 2025. Jamison Tucker's return gives you that explosive threat downfield that you really enjoy. Now, he only had 34 catches last year, but he did turn that into 579 yards and 6 touchdowns, average 17 yards per carry. So this is a guy that can make life easy for the guys around him, but also could potentially have a monster year. The quarterback position is going to be a battle. Emmett Brown is one of those guys that is competing for the starting spot, and honestly, I'm kind of surprised that he transferred from San Jose State. Gets the opportunity, obviously, to compete once again, but I really like what he can do. You'd like to see him complete more passes than he did last year, but over 1,600 yards and 16 touchdowns to just 5 interceptions. That's a good touchdown to interception ratio that you want for a quarterback. You obviously still want to see him take that to another level. And with the talent like Jamison Tucker that's coming back for this team, you feel like he could potentially achieve that. The offensive line will be interesting because they have plenty of returning talent, and Nick Del Grand is one of those guys that will step up in a big way and be that blindside protector. Honorable mention all Sun Belt player in his first year as a starter. And you feel like the offense, if it's going to take a step forward, the offensive line will play a big role, not just the skill positions. This really shouldn't be a surprise, but I think when Jamie Chadwell left, a lot of people expected the rushing attack to take a huge step back, but they still finished 49th. This is still a group that averaged almost 180 yards per game on the ground. They lose quite a bit of talent to the transfer portal. You lose a couple of your top names. Braden Bennett is gone. You lose Christian Washington, but you do bring in Jalen John. And when you bring in a guy from UMass, you probably think, okay, well, why did we do that? Jalen John was one of the few bright spots for UMass, a guy who, when you look at his numbers, you probably aren't blown away by them, but averaging 5 yards per carry at UMass is really impressive. With teams absolutely dominating the Minutemen, and especially now that they're going through a coaching change, you know how difficult it is to be productive and be successful. The fact that he did that at this program, and now he comes into one that potentially gives him opportunities to be even more successful, speaks to what he could do for them. The other quarterback that we talked about before is MJ Morris. Emmett Brown and MJ Morris are going to compete for the starting spot, and MJ Morris is someone who, he starts at NC State, transfers to Maryland, now is at Coastal Carolina. Definitely still has the talent to be a QB1, but he has a lot of work to do. You saw what he did last year at Maryland, not the most impressive numbers. Competing with Emmett Brown isn't going to be easy, and if he does win the job, like I said, just like Emmett Brown, the talent that he gets to throw to will make his numbers a lot better. It's just going to be tough. You're just going through, there's definitely a mental element to transferring this many times, learning a new system, and trying to maybe battle away the expectations that people put on you because of where you came from, because of where you were recruited, where you were ranked, and battling those and moving on from that and finding a way to just play ball is a challenge that MJ Morris has to battle through. Now, joining Shane Bruce at linebacker is Trey Brown, and Trey Brown was pretty disruptive for this defense. 36 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. So he is someone who is ready to take a step in his production, in his role with this defense. This is a defense, like I said, that needs to take a step forward. They need to get better, plain and simple. You cannot have this same giving up more points than scoring. You're just not going to win a ton of football games, and long term, that's not a formula that's going to keep your coach around. So if the defense wants to get better, The linebackers have to step up. The defensive line has to be more disruptive, and the secondary has to make more plays. One of those players in that secondary is Zamarian Gordon, kind of an underrated player, honestly. Overall, you lose some talented players like Juan Powell. You lose a guy that did a lot of things for your defense. You lose Tobias Fletcher. You lose a first team All Sunbelt player in Matthew McDoom to the transfer portal. So there's plenty of talent departing. You have to find guys that can step up. And Gordon is one of those guys, good size at 6'2, 215 pounds. So you feel like he has the right tools to be in this position and be successful. And if he does, this defense should be a lot better. Another guy, and honestly, Coastal Carolina's wide receivers, which this really sounds really weird to say when you go from the Jamie Chadwell era to this, have a ton of talent and have good size to be big time players. Cameron Wright is another guy that can stretch the defense. So you have two big wide receivers in Jamison Tucker and Cameron Wright that could make life miserable for the Sun Belt. 19 catches last year, so not a ton of production, but 314 yards, average 16 and a half yards per catch and 2 touchdowns. So if those two get going, regardless of who's playing quarterback, this offense will take a step and put up more points. Another transfer they bring in at the linebacker position, someone who I think could have a big time impact, we'll see how they move guys around, is Dante Lunnan. And this is someone who comes in from Albany. Albany's had a ton of transfers out of their program over the last handful of years. Everybody obviously remembers Jared Verse when he went to Florida State and thrived, but Albany has put together an impressive group of talent in the transfer portal. I bet you if you go look at the players that they lost, you could put together a pretty decent team. And London is one of those guys that is just next in line. 131 tackles, 12 tackles for loss. Again, if you want your team to be better, you want playmakers on that roster, and adding him gives you good depth at a position that is already pretty much a strength. Now, the hard part about this is when you look at the schedule, there's not an over-under set, so I set it at 5 just to see how I feel about that. The ceiling to me is 7-5. This is a tough conference to win, and you also throw in games against Virginia and ECU and South Carolina in the non-conference. Not exactly the most winnable games. You start at Virginia. Charleston Southern should be a win. ECU is going to be tough. And then when you get into conference play, South Alabama lost a ton of talent, but still a very good team that is going to be tough to beat. Old Dominion is going to be better than I think a lot of people expect. ULM surprised people last year. App State's looking to bounce back under a new coaching staff. Marshall has a new coach, so you don't know what they're going to be. Georgia State had a new coach last year. Georgia Southern is looking to compete for a conference title. We talked about South Carolina, and then James Madison might be the best team in the Sun Belt. So winning football games this year will not be easy. And like I said, if you replicate the same formula that you had last year, you will lose more games this year than you did last year. There's plenty of talent on this roster to make things better than it was. Winning football games still is going to be tough. If you don't have the right guys in place, if you don't have the right people running your program, this could be a long year. And it also could be very fun. It also could be exciting. I think the quarterback position is going to play a big role in that. And then the front seven of that defense, especially the defensive line. If they can find players that can step up, they do have quite a few options. But if they can be more disruptive, that's going to have a tremendous effect long-term on this team's success.